The U.S. Court of International Trade ruled on Wednesday that U.S. President Donald Trump does not have the authority to impose his sweeping Liberation Day tariffs or his fentanyl-related duties against Canada and Mexico. The ruling marks the first major legal pushback to Trump's broad use of tariffs to upend global trade. Global's Washington bureau chief Jackson Proskow joins us now with the details. So Jackson, what exactly did the court say?
Well, good morning. The court effectively said that the president does not have unbound authority to implement tariffs on nearly every country in the world, and that he exceeded his authority by effectively trying to justify this as a national security issue when he implemented these tariffs on so-called Liberation Day. So in short, they're saying that all those tariffs, except for the ones on steel, aluminum, and microchips, are effectively illegal. They were implemented illegally by the president, and that it is up to Congress to decide how to deal with international commerce. Now, it's not clear when the tariffs are going to actually end here. The White House has already filed an appeal, and the court left in place a sort of 10-day grace period to go through the bureaucratic process of winding down the tariffs. In a response to Global News, a White House spokesperson said, quote, "It's not for unelected judges to decide how to properly address a national emergency." And he went on to say that the president would use, quote, "every lever of executive power to address this crisis."
All right, so what does this mean then for Canada and those fentanyl-related tariffs?
Well, effectively, they're done at this point. That 25% tariff brought in because of fentanyl, the court said it's simply not justifiable because they said it does not fit the emergency law's definition of a mechanism to deal with a crisis effectively here. So there are expectations now of a fire hose of imports into the U.S. from both Canada and Mexico, while exporters try and take advantage of what's effectively here at least a grace period, a lull in the tariffs while we figure out if these are going to stick in the long term, if the president's appeal will be successful, if the Supreme Court will ultimately intervene. But certainly good news for a lot of Canadian companies that rely on their exports to the United States.
All right, so Jackson, this has thrown a bit of a wrench then in Trump and his economic plans. So what does it all mean then for the president and his plans overall?
Yeah, a couple of things. Of course, you'll remember that on Liberation Day, the president sort of touted how every country in the world would be lining up to make a deal with him. And he certainly talked about that ever since. We already saw, the British Prime Minister here, touting a deal, or at least the framework of a deal with the United States on tariffs. Well, suddenly that doesn't seem to matter much anymore. And if you're a country that was subjected to these tariffs, why would you waste your time now trying to make a deal when you don't know if the tariffs will be here for the long term and when a court has declared them illegal? So that scraps that. But the other thing to keep in mind here is that tariffs were part of an economic strategy for the president. The billions of dollars in revenue that they would have collected were supposed to offset massive tax cuts that the president wanted to put in place, along with spending cuts. And now the economic picture there gets a whole lot more complicated because he doesn't have that revenue. He's already looking at running a deficit based on legislation being passed in Congress here. And it's not clear if the math makes sense without the tariffs. Finally, we should point out that, of course, the stock markets, they're going to like this. They're set to open up big time today. Investors very happy about this. You'll remember that after Liberation Day, the markets effectively tanked. They've been on a roller coaster ride ever since. It's clear investors do not like tariffs. They're happy about this news. But again, it's a big setback for the president.
All right, that is our Washington bureau chief, Jackson Proskow. Jackson, thanks for your time today.